All right. I know some of you are like, where are we right now? Where is it? Yeah. Hey, it's just awkward, right? To come to church and do the sex talk. And I know some of you, are probably invited by somebody here and you finally came, or you're driving by the church and you're like, oh, great, we're doing this. Because you kind of think, well, I already know what you're going to say. Like, I know, generally we kind of know, even if you're not in the church, not a Christian, you kind of know what Christians say and what the Bible teaches historically. The kind of historic biblical thing is that God designed sex to be enjoyed in the context of marriage between a man and a woman, and anything outside of that context is sexual immorality and to be avoided, and like, and it's a foul, and I know that already. And if from the outside looking in, if you're not a Christ follower, you don't only maybe know what that is or what Christians think, but it just seems so outdated. Like it's so 1820s. It's like, that's what Christians think, but they're kind of weird. And who really does that? In our culture, that's of course has a very casual attitude towards sex. And hey, two consenting adults, why do you care what just do what you want to do, right? And so you think, well, it's just from the outside looking in, it looks a little bit like, man, so 1820s. And even for those on the inside, those who are in the church or who become Jesus followers, even then, again, because of the casual nature of the way we're raised with this, coming into the church, you think, well, okay, yeah, I guess that's what the Bible teaches. And for people who can do that, they get like a special gold star or something. But who can really do that? Is it really that big of a deal anyway? And I'm just going to kind of blow it off. And a lot of Christ followers, it's just kind of the one area, just sort of blow this one off a little bit and think, well, God will forgive me or it'll be okay. It's just not that big of a deal. And so what I want us to do today is I'm going to challenge us all to be really open to this possibility. That God, who created us and who created us as sexual beings and who wrote about this, gave us wisdom in the Bible, that maybe his perspective is actually really good. And that maybe what he wants for us is actually better, what he wants for us is best, that he wants to spare us some pain, and he wants to make this part of life really, really good. And just to be open to that possibility as we look at a biblical view of sexuality to say, yeah, what is it? And even for those who say, yeah, I already know, and I'm kind of doing that, I'm good, I want all of us to be open, because in this particular message, and you'll realize it by the end, I don't care where you're coming from, there's opportunity for encouragement and there's opportunity for challenge to handle this area of life differently. So let's just be really open as we look at it together. And this talk about God's perspective about sex is going to be built in a book, 1 Corinthians in the New Testament, if you want to turn in your Bible app there primarily. But it's built around two principles. And here's the two principles. The first one is that sex is designed by God to be enjoyable and profoundly powerful. That God is the one who made sex up. It's not like an accident. Like when God made Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis, and he made a male and female, it says they were naked and unashamed. They were in this completely safe, wonderful environment. He creates marriage right away. So they're in this, and they had sex. And it's not like God was up in heaven looking down the first time Adam and Eve had sex and said, what? What are they doing? Like, they figured that out? Like, what? So get some angels down there, pull those people apart, those nasty humans, make sure there's a Bible in between them all the time, 6 inches. Just don't, and that's not the deal. God created us to enjoy this part of life, sex to be part of two people becoming one, which is the Genesis definition of marriage, and the process of marriage is two people becoming one. And sex is designed to be a very powerful and profound and wonderful thing. God wants us to enjoy this part of life. In fact, there's a whole book in the Old Testament called Song of Solomon. And there's one point of that whole book, and that's how sex can be great. That's what that whole book in the Bible is about. God made a book in the Bible, how romance and sex can be great in the context in which God designed for it, and how it can be better and better. And because of that, people through the centuries have really struggled with Song of Solomon, because they're like, it must be about something else, like really deep, because it can't just be about that. But it's about that, because God wants this powerful part of life to be powerfully good. When Jesus came to the planet, he said, I have come that you may have life and live it to the full. He didn't say, I came to ruin your life and take all the fun out of it. He's saying, I came to restore to life, every part of life, this part of life, every part of life, what sin has taken away, to go back to God's design and make it good again, really good, and to help us flourish. That's his heart behind everything we're going to hear about today. And the reason this is so important is because it is profoundly powerful, which gets me to my next principle, and that is sex is way more powerful and profound than we realize. It's way more powerful and profound than we realize. And this is where we, in a very casual culture related to sex, need to just kind of say, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be so casual. Maybe I should treat it a little bit more carefully if it really is more powerful and profound than I might be thinking. And that's what we're going to dive into in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Because there he's talking to a group of people who were very casual in their attitude about sex. And like, oh yeah, okay, that's cute, the biblical view. And he's going to say, no, it's way more powerful and it's way more profound than you think. And so we're going to, if you want to turn in your Bible app to 1 Corinthians 6, that's where we're going to jump in a little bit. And I think it's easy to think that when you're reading about Bible times and Bible people, especially with something like sex, that culture was way more like prudish than we are, way more conservative sexually than we are in our culture. But that's not true at all. Paul was writing to brand new Christians. He had started this church in Corinth. He was now writing them a letter after he had gone away to start new churches. And they came to know Jesus out of the Roman world. And the Roman world was way more casual about sex and sexuality and nudity and all that than we are. In fact, when you go back and just look at the way history, like the thing about nudity, they were way more comfortable with nudity than we are. Like if you went to the Olympics back then, all the athletes were naked. They all competed in the nude, which was a bummer for Nike and Adidas and all that. But it was except shoes, I guess. But they also they publicly bathed. Like it was an event. Like they had these bath houses and stuff that were really fancy and amazing for 2,000 years ago. And there were like steam rooms and saunas and water baths that were warm. And you would just go with your neighbors, mixed company, guys and girls, and with your neighbors and, work people and all that. And you just be there naked in those things and just say, hey, how are your kids? Hey, good, all this. They also had public toilets. And those public toilets were guys and girls. They had no stalls. They were just these toilets, like 100 toilets in a room, and you'd sit there and do what you were doing, and it was like a social thing. I mean, is that not weird? It's like, just a minute, I need to concentrate just a little bit. Okay, yeah, okay. So they were like way more loose than we are on that, and also sexuality. On sexuality, if you're a guy especially, the Me Too movement hadn't caught up in Rome, 2,000 years ago. But if you were a Roman guy, most people were married, and they'd be married to their wife, and they would have sex with their wife, but that was primarily about having kids, and it was your family and all that. But sex for pleasure was outside that, and they would, and so therefore a Roman guy, if they were somewhat wealthy, would have slaves, or slavery was very common in the Roman Empire, and they were your property, and you would have sex for pleasure with your slaves. Prostitution was super common. That was just a normal part of life. And guys would have prostitutes, and that would just be normal. In fact, in Corinth, in which Paul is writing, the book of Corinthians, that was like the Amsterdam of the ancient world, or the Las Vegas of the ancient world. It's where you went to really go crazy. In fact, there was a phrase back in the Roman Empire they used to Corinthianize, which meant to go really crazy. It's like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in Corinth stays in Corinth. It's one of those kind of places. In fact, in Corinth, their big place of worship, not Christian worship, but pagan Roman worship, is you'd go to the temple, and there were hundreds of temple prostitutes, and part of worship was going and having sex with these temple prostitutes, and those were the spiritual people. If you were really spiritual, if you were really religious, you did that. If you weren't religious, then you didn't do prostitution. It's kind of flipped. I mean, coming to church here is different than that, right? It is, okay? In case you're wondering, if you're new, it's way different than that, okay? Kind of opposite. But that's what they did. So for them in Corinth, going to see a prostitute for a guy was as common as for us going to Chick-fil-A or going to Whataburger or whatever. It's just what you did. I mean, that's how casual they were with it. So when Paul comes and introduces people to Jesus who were, that's what they were doing, that's what they were involved in and all that, and he calls them to what Jesus calls us to, sex within the context of marriage and as a bond and the importance of that context, that was really new for them. And so when Paul was there with them, it made sense. They're like, yeah, that's better. Okay, we're going to do that. And then he goes off to start other churches, and they've got some questions about it. It's kind of gone fuzzy for them. And 1 Corinthians was a book written in response to a letter from the church in Corinth to Paul, where he was, saying, hey, we got some questions, and we need some clarity. And one of the questions they had was, hey, will you remind us why, going to prostitutes is a bad thing? Because it kind of feels like a good thing. And so can you just kind of clear it up a little bit for us, remind us why this would be a bad thing? Now, for you and me, that's probably not your big question. I don't know, but I think generally that's not like our big thing is, why is prostitution okay or not? For us, our questions are a little different because we're in a different context culturally. But what Paul says is going to apply to all of it, anything outside of God's design. So for us, it might be, hey, if two people are consenting adults and want to hook up and do whatever with it's their body, I mean, why would that be a big deal? Or if two people are dating and love each other and care about each other, I mean, it's just a natural thing, even if they're not married, to have sex. I mean, or pornography, in our culture, which is, everywhere, then why is that really a big deal? And what Paul says is gonna help us with all that. Because here's his bottom line, and then he's gonna give a couple reasons for it. But his bottom line is this. 1 Corinthians 6:18, he says, flee from sexual immorality. Now, sexual immorality is anything outside of God's design, okay, of sex within, sex in the context of marriage, and anything outside that. So sex, oral sex, or whatever outside of that context, hooking up, pornography, you name, okay, I won't keep naming things, but you get the idea, right? And he says, flee, run away, see it as dangerous. Because his point here is not just going to be, don't do the sexual immorality thing because God is going to get mad. He's going to infect you with fleas or something, or, because it's wrong. He's going to say that may be true. It's wrong, and that should be motivated enough. But he's saying, no, it's dangerous. See it that way. Run away from it. Right now, my son, Caleb, who's my youngest son, graduated from college, Arkansas. Any Woo Pigs out there? There you go. Graduated from Arkansas in May. Had been planning for years to do this trip to Alaska after graduation for this summer. He starts coming down to the lower 48 this next week. And he's been there. He outfitted a Dodge Sprinter, if you know what those are, big van. Well, in fact, I'll show it to you. I don't know if you can see it very well, but that's his Dodge Sprinter. He's on top. That's the Northern Lights and Denali, and just incredible experience. In fact, you can follow him if you want, Unsafe Tomatoes on Instagram, and see his adventure. But it's been an amazing adventure. But one of the things that of all the things he was looking forward to, he also knew there were things to be careful about. And because people do stupid things in Alaska, like they'll see a moose and they're like, "Ooh, let's go, let's get a selfie with a moose." That's a bad idea. More people die from moose, whatever the plural of moose is, moosen, meese, it's moose, but than with bears. But certainly, you're not going to go take a selfie with a grizzly bear, right? It's a bad idea. And so therefore, Caleb has bear spray everywhere he goes and other things too, just to make sure he's very careful about bears, very careful about moose, because it's a beautiful place, but it's dangerous. And this is a beautiful area of life, but there's dangers here. It can harm us. And what Paul is saying is this is so powerful, it can be beautiful, but it can be powerfully damaging too, and don't let that happen. See it for what it is. See it like the grizzly bear. And he's going to give two reasons why to see it that way. The first one is it's dangerous for us, that we harm ourselves. When we go against God's design, we may not realize it. Usually it takes a long time to realize it, when we're doing whatever, and then later you realize, oh yeah, that's true. Some of you are like, yep. But some of you are like, I don't think so. But just go with it, is that we harm ourselves. And listen to what Paul says about it. He says, flee from sexual immorality. That's the part we just saw. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. He's saying all sex is damaging, all sex is bad and dangerous and bad for us, not healthy, but sexual immorality is unique because when we choose that, we actually hurt ourselves. We hurt other people too, but we also hurt ourselves. We wound ourselves, we damage ourselves. And most of us don't want to do that, right? Most of us don't want to hurt ourselves. We don't want to damage ourselves. But when we choose sex outside of God's design, we do. And you think, well, how? And he tells us how. Do you not know that he unites himself with a prostitute? Because again, that's their question. Why is that a big deal? Is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. So when you and I read this, body and flesh, we just think of like our human body because we're been influenced, this is a long conversation, but been influenced by dualism. And so we think body and spirit, two different things. But that's not actually a biblical view of, so when he's talking about body and flesh, he's talking about our everything. Like he's talking about us, all of us. And that sex is designed by God all the way from Genesis as part of two people becoming one. Not just two bodies joining together, but those two bodies joining together is way more profound than that. It's actually part of two people coming together, two souls coming together. And in the context of marriage, that's wonderful because in that committed lifelong relationship, it's part in a beautiful and profound way of two people, not just joining together physically, but joining together emotionally and spiritually. And it doesn't just bond two bodies together, it bonds two souls together. That's why it's way more powerful and profound than we think. And the word he uses here, unites or fuses, is, again, it's about two people becoming one. Often that word is used in like 2,000 years ago, that Greek word of like welding two things together, two things becoming one, or gluing two things together. And then if you just rip them apart, that's why it's damaging. You just say, okay, I'm going to join my soul with somebody and then move on and move on, move on. We actually leave part of ourselves behind. It's a little bit like super glue. I always think of that when I think of this word unite. And to that end, we have some, we're going to do a little experiment here on the stage. We have some volunteers, some super glue volunteers. They didn't know they were volunteering for that. They just knew they were volunteering. So our volunteers, if you could come up on the stage, let's welcome them. Whoever you are, just come on up and let's welcome these guys. I haven't met them yet. And what we're doing here is pretty simple. So we've got some containers of super glue. And actually, if you can come here as close to the TVs you can get on this side of me. Hey, how you doing? Yep, thank you. It's very brave of you guys.
Sunday it was.
All right, so we got everybody on camera? Perfect. So let me give you your super glue. So here's the deal. Okay, this is all I want you to do. I want you to go ahead and open it up and then shoot some super glue into your fingers. Like, go ahead and liberal amount. Don't go chintzy. All right. Oh, man, you're good. Look at that. That's a lot. And then I want you to attach it to your face and hold it there. We're just going to hold it there for 1 minute. So we have some doubts. Yeah, go for it. Just for 45 seconds. Yeah. No, do what you feel comfortable doing. Yeah.
Peer pressure.
It is peer pressure.
Right.
She's saying this is peer pressure.
Trust him.
She's saying trust him, which is a bad idea. But actually, you can trust me because it's just aloe vera gel. We took out the super glue. But so now I know who's trusting, right, and who's not. But hey, let's thank these guys. Just so you know, you can trust us enough to know we would never do that. Right, that's a bad idea. That's a really bad idea to glue your fingers to your face with super glue. And because you're going to leave part of your hand behind or part of your face or something, right? That's what happens when you fuse things together and pull them apart. And that's what Paul's saying. That's what we do with our soul. This is a soul thing. It's not just a body thing. To that end, years ago, I was talking about this, actually in a series on that book, I was talking about the Old Testament Song of Solomon, and this lady came up to me I hadn't met yet after one of the services, and she said, hey, you need to know a couple things about me. One is I'm 60 years old, and number two is I love sex. And I was like, okay, thank you. Nice to meet you. I'm Jeb. It's just kind of interesting, but she had a reason. And because she was going, no, I really do. I was like, I got it. I didn't want her to, And then, and she said, no, I've had, 3 husbands and a lot of sexual partners over the years. And I'm just really motivated. I was, okay, all right, yep. And I was wondering where it was going. And then, and she's a delightful person, but then she teared up. And she said, I really wish that what you said today I'd heard when I was 16, not 60. Because then I didn't realize it, but I've done a lot of soul damage. Now, we'll come back to the rest of her story at the end of the message, because that's not the end of her story, because God's a redeemer and all that and a healer. But if people live long enough to know, and that's why, and I want to be really careful with this example, but that's why when people are victims of sexual abuse, it's not just a body thing. It's way deeper than that. That's why somebody who's abused at the age of 7 still carries that at 77. God can bring healing and all of that, and He will if we open up our life to Him, but it's profound, right? It's not just a body thing. It's something deeper than that. That's why when somebody's victim of sexual violence, like a rape or something, it's way different trying to get over that than being mugged physically. Because it's deeper. It's a soul thing. God can heal. God can do that. But it's a soul thing. That's why when somebody has an affair, and some of you have been on that, you've been married and your spouse has had an affair, and you know what that feels like. And it's not just a body thing, right? It's not just a body violation. Oh, you do that with your body. It's a soul betrayal. It's not just a body betrayal. And again, God can help heal that and all that too. But there's a lot of damage there because this is a soul connection, right? It's not just a body connection. And that's why as a pastor, I've seen a lot of things harm a lot of people, and I've seen God heal a lot of things from a lot of people too. But I haven't seen anything cause as much soul damage as this area of life because God designed it to be powerful and He designed it to be profound. And you can get it in the idea of a powerful soul glue in the context of lifelong committed relationship called marriage. That's awesome. But outside that, that's why it causes damage. And that's true not just of physical bodies interacting, that's also true of porn. And we need to talk about porn a little bit because it is so easy and so prevalent and it's just everywhere. And like 90-something% of guys and 80-something% of women here and wherever we are in our culture, right? It is affecting our culture in such big ways. And it's easy to see it as like a victimless sin. Like it's just, it's not hurting anybody. Who's that hurting? It's just me and my computer or me and this TV or whatever. Who's that hurt? And let me say a couple things. One is you actually are hurting people. It's the porn industry that really fuels, more than anything else, sex trafficking and sex slavery that's affecting millions of innocent people. And every time you look at porn, think about that. But not only that, you also, as Paul's emphasizing, you harm yourself. And you don't have to take the Bible's word for it. Now, porn has been a thing long enough with the advent of the internet over the last 15, 20 years that now they've done all these studies and brain studies. And there's a great one. This is a TED Talk. Let me get through this, sorry. It's called The Great Porn Experiment by Gary Wilson. And I would encourage you it's not easy. It's like watching a scary movie, but I would encourage you to just watch it anyway. And what it is, it's a compilation of about 20 brain studies that have been done with people in porn versus those who haven't. By the way, one of the big struggles they had was finding a control group of people who had not experienced porn. That was really hard because they were focused on young adults and they were like, man, where are those people? But they eventually able to figure that out. They did these brain versus this brain, and they show how brains change over time as people progress in their involvement in porn. And it's scary because you can see it. You just see it on the brain scans. It changes our brain chemistry. and it affects sexual response and the ability for sex to be connective in the way that it should be. And again, that's another thing God can bring healing to and all that. I'm just saying, I'll stop with talking about the damage there. But I'm just saying we should treat porn not casually, but like a grizzly bear, because it is destroying people. And for those who would say, man, I think that's me, then I'll say, well, what are you going to do? I mean, there's some steps to take and some healing and recovery and all that, because it's an addiction. I mean, it is a very addictive thing. That's the point about brain chemistry. And for those who'd say, well, I'm not there yet, but I've been pretty casual about it, think of the grizzly bear. I think we should be scared to death of it. I am. And some people have been like, well, you're a pastor. You wouldn't do that. Yeah, I would. I'm a guy. I mean, I would do that like anybody, right? And so I'm scared to death of it. And therefore, I'm not casual about it. And that's why every Monday morning I meet, one of the things that my accountability partner and I, we've met for 28 years every Monday morning. And so we've met long enough, we can kind of smell BS and, the easy answer and all that kind of stuff. But it's one of the things we talk about. What have you let your eyes see? We have technology also that keeps us honest and about where we're going online and that kind of thing. Also, I remember this was a while back, like 10 years ago or so, but we changed cable providers and to Spectrum Cable. And, I'm not trying to advertise for them because it's pretty frustrating anyway. But when you sign up for a new thing, this lady I was talking to is signing me up. She's like, oh, well, you get, for 6 months, you get free HBO and Cinemax and whatever else. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want that. And I don't want that. Just make sure that doesn't come on my TV. And she said, well, no, it's free. And I said, well, I know it's free, but it's dangerous. She's like, what do you mean it's dangerous? She said, look, I'm not talking about even dangerous for my kids. That's true. I'm talking about it's dangerous for me. There are things on there I don't want to see. And I feel like if it's there, I'm going to look at it, and I don't want to. And so it's just a whole lot better. I just don't want that. And this lady I was talking to, she said, are you a Christian? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And he said, well, praise God. I'm going to be praising God for you all night. And this has made my day. And she said, we're going to get that stuff's not coming into your house. I'm going to make sure it's not coming into your house. And then we had about a 10-minute conversation about church and where she goes to church and all this stuff and what's happening. And but I just don't want to mess with that stuff. And I'm just, hey, look, if you're playing loose and casual with the grizzly bear, stop it. And if you're struggling with it, don't struggle alone. That's why James, in the book of James, that's our next series, says, confess your sins to one another so you can find healing. If you try to deal with a sinful addiction on your own, it's not gonna work. And you've got to have other people that are in it with you. And I know it's hard, but are in it with you. There's Renew on Thursday nights. It's not just about addiction. It's about all kinds of struggles, but it's certainly great for that, for Renew. And it's such a common struggle. You're not alone. Like, if you're thinking, oh, man, I'm like the only one. No, you're not. Most people in this room have this struggle. And so don't struggle alone. And if it's gone all the way to addiction, there's help for that too, counseling and so on. Don't play loose and free with a grizzly bear. So the first reason is just however we want to say it with sexual pornography, or sexual immorality, because the Greek word is porneia, that's translated sexual immorality. We harm ourselves. But there's another reason too, and that is we dishonor Jesus. Now, if you're not a Jesus follower, you're like, I can live with that. And so just focus on the first one. But for those of us who are Jesus followers, right, we've made a commitment. We've signed up for something. And when we sign up to follow Jesus and he enters into our life, that what Paul's going to say is this is way more profound and powerful, and we may not realize it, but we actually dishonor Jesus every time we choose sexual immorality, and here's why. He describes it. I have the right to do anything. Now, these are quotes from the church that he's heard. So they're just saying, hey, look, it's my body, right? I can do what I want with my body. Like, who are you to tell me what to do with my body? I can do whatever I want with my body. It's just my body. It's just a body thing. It's no big deal. And so you say, I have the right to do anything, you say. But Paul says, but not everything is beneficial. That's what we just talked about. Doesn't mean it's good, like a good idea. I have the right to do anything, you say again. But he says, but I will not be mastered by anything. That sexual immorality has a way of getting out of control, of taking over. And Paul said, yeah, I don't want that. Like, I want to be in control, not out of control. I want to have self-control. And then another quote, he says, you say, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. That's a kind of weird saying, but what they're saying is this: hey, we have stomachs that need to eat, and we have bodies that need to have sex. So what's the big deal? You know? I mean, I don't shame my stomach for eating, and why would there be anything wrong with, our bodies like to have sex and having sex and doing whatever we want? And so he's going to say, well, hold up a little bit on that one too. It says, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Meaning, once you and I come to know Jesus, that Jesus indwells us, we become the temple of God. He is in us. He's not just for us, he's with us, and not just with us, but in us. And in light of that, shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. What he's saying is, everywhere you and I go, we take Jesus with us in a way that's way more profound than we think, because he indwells us. And Paul's saying, so you're going to go unite yourself in a profound way with a prostitute? And you're just going to take Jesus with you? Come on. Really? Or, think about it. Next time you think, I'm going to have this affair or whatever, and okay, Jesus, let's go have an affair. Or, hey, Jesus, let's look at this online. Or, maybe that's a really bad idea. It dishonors him. Do we really want to do that? And the way Paul ends that little discussion is, he says, you're not your own. Meaning you say, well, it's my body, I can do what I want. Not if you're a Jesus follower. You were bought at a price. Meaning he paid the price is his death on a cross to redeem us and to save us, and he's transforming us. And when we choose to follow Jesus, we're saying, hey, my life's not about you not about me anymore, it's about you. I belong to you. He says, therefore, honor God with your bodies. Meaning, if you've signed up to be a Jesus follower, then follow Jesus in this area of your life. Say, I'm going to honor God with my body. I'm going to honor God with my sexuality. And trusting, and I would challenge any believer to do that, right? Because not only because it's the right thing to do, because it's better. Like Jesus said, God's commands are not arbitrary. They're there because he wants us to flourish. And even if I don't understand it, to say, I'm going to be on the road of obedience, and I know I'm going to fall off, and God will help me get back on and all, but I want to be as much as I can on the road of obedience, even if I don't understand it all, even if I don't think it's that big a deal. I'm going to trust that maybe he knows more than I do, and I'm going to follow him. And I'm going to bend to his better way. And that's a commitment of a Jesus follower. And so Paul's saying, make a choice. And so let me challenge you, if you're a Jesus follower, to just make this decision right now to honor God with your sexuality. And say, even if I don't really get why it's such a big deal still, even after all that Paul said in 1 Corinthians, I'm still going to, all I need to know is this is what Jesus affirms, and I trust him, and I'm going to do that. I promise you won't regret it. And for those who would say, well, I don't know if I'm a Jesus follower or not, just on the harm thing, right? Just to say, I can't imagine just blowing off God who created us and knows how this works. I mean, you can do that, but that's your choice, right? But it's a choice with consequences, and that's what Paul's getting to. So what does this all mean, for kind of boil it down? Well, we have different categories of people, right? So some of you are single, and we gave a whole week to singleness in this series. Go back and watch that. And we talked about this some, that if you're single, and you're not married, that means you don't have sex outside of marriage. That's what that means. You say, well, I already have. Well, okay, I'm saying from now on, you say, I'm going to follow Jesus. What we've done. I mean, these people in 1 Corinthians have been through way more than most. I mean, they've been doing the whole prostitute thing and all this stuff they were doing. Paul doesn't shame them for what they've done. He's just saying, hey, from now on, let's honor God with our bods. And so to say, I'm going to choose celibacy. between now and when I'm married. Some people, for a number of reasons, will never get married. And and in our culture says, well, you can't have a full and flourishing life without sex. And that's just a lie. We talked about that week of singleness. Jesus is a perfect example of that, who lived a full and flourishing life as a single guy without sex. Paul, who wrote this, same thing. You say, well, what if we're dating? And we really love each other and we want to be together that way before marriage and find out if we really connect and live together and all that. And there's a lot of people in our campuses right now because that's our culture. That's normal part of culture. So the point of this is not to be ashamed for what you're doing, what you've done, but just to consider it in light of what God says. So you say, well, okay, yeah, we're living together and we love each other and we're committed and we think marriage is going to happen. We just want to make sure we're compatible and all that. And on the surface, that makes perfect sense. I understand completely why, people would think that way. But it's not a biblical way to think, but I certainly understand why. And you think, well, that would make sense. But it's really interesting, like take the Bible out of it, because you think that would help marriages be better, right, when people live together before marriage. But actually it's the opposite. That you're twice as likely to get divorced if you've lived together before marriage than if you hadn't. Isn't that interesting? Because you think it'd be the other way around. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is that when a relationship develops, when you get sex involved in a relationship too early, then again, sex is powerful and profound. It's a soul connection, not just a body connection. You feel this sense of connection before you actually really know the other person, before the relationships had the opportunity to develop. And so you can make some mistakes. It kind of changes the way relationships are designed to develop. But also, I think the other reason is there's certain muscles you're going to need in marriage that you don't exercise if you're living together and having sex outside of marriage as a dating couple. And I'm talking about muscles like your commitment muscles and self-control muscles and faithfulness muscles. So you go into marriage with really flabby muscles in areas where you're going to need those. And it's easy, therefore, for bad things to happen. Doesn't mean God can't help people be married. In fact, if you are living together, I'm just going to encourage, this is not about feeling guilty or whatever. You can do what you want to do. But I'm going to challenge you and encourage you to consider what God says. And I'm going to challenge you to make a decision. Like, is this going to be a relationship I'm going to commit to or not? And if not, then break it off. At least the living together part, meaning somebody move out. And if you want to get married, then we'll help you get married. We'll do some premarital counseling to make sure it's a good thing, but we'll marry you for free. And you can email me, and don't wait till you can do the royal wedding and, Harry and Merkel. What's her name, Merkel? What is it? Megan. Yeah, Megan. It doesn't have to be like that, right? You can maybe do that as a renewal of vows 10 years from now when you can afford it. But because it's about it's just not about that, and all I'm saying is just consider it. And I've counseled a lot of people who are living together to move out and make sure that's what they really want to do, most of whom have gotten married, some of whom haven't. And either way, they've been incredibly thankful. I've never had anybody that I've counseled doing that saying, I'm so stupid. Everybody. I'm batting 100 or 1,000, 100% on that one. And if you're married, Paul's going to go on in the next chapter and talk about that. And the point of this is just make this part of life really good. Paul says the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and he's talking in this context about sex, okay? And likewise, the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent, and even that for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. He's saying there's times to abstain from sex, maybe, as a married couple. But what he's saying is, but not very long. And if that's an issue, he's just saying, man, make this part of life good. It's a regular part of married life, and make it good. And if you're not connecting that way, well, then take some steps. Get some help. Go to a counselor. Talk about it with each other, and how this part of life can be really good. And I love his little thing of stop depriving each other. Because I told Christy, I don't want to deprive you, And Like, no, I'm okay. You know, no, I don't, you know. So anyway, you can have this conversation yourself. And then for those, the last categories, for those who, man, right now, there's just a lot of pain. I mean, you're just feeling it because you bring this up and maybe it's shame and guilt because, oh man, what I've done, or pain because of what's happened to you. Or you say, man, I'm out of control and I don't know what to do. And let me encourage you, God is really good at being not just a forgiver, but a healer and a redeemer. And he will, if we take steps and don't go it alone and get with that, he will help us through addiction. And I mean, he'll motivate us to take the right steps. He'll, you know, that girl, the lady that I talked about who was 60 and loved sex and all that, the pain, that wasn't the end of her story. That's really not what she was there to talk about. Just, I wish I'd heard that when 16. She went on to talk about how in the last 2 years she had begun a relationship with Jesus and how he's been healing this part of her life and changing this part of her life. And like Joel says, that God will restore what the locusts have eaten, that what the results of sin eats away from our life, God loves to restore and redeem and make what's ugly a beautiful part of our story. And I've seen God do that over and over again, not just with people who have been involved sexually outside of God's design, but also people who've been really wounded and hurt by the mistakes of other people and the sins of other people, and see God when we lean into his love. There is not a more powerful force in the universe than the love of God in his ability to not just forgive, but redeem and restore and rebuild. And so just open up your life to the most powerful force in the universe and let him do something beautiful. Let's bow our heads together. Father, I thank you for the wisdom you give in this important area of life. And God, all of us mess up on this one. It's just so easy to mess up. And so God, will you help us be wise enough to listen to you? And certainly for those of us who are Jesus followers, God, right now, we just commit to honor you with this part of our life. And help us bend to your better way. And Father, I pray that you would forgive where we need forgiveness, and you'd heal where we need healing, and redeem where we need redeeming, and give us the wisdom to know what steps to take to make this part of life good, or to move toward healing, or to move away from addiction, or to connect to our spouse again. God, just motivate us, because you love us and you want this area of life to be great. And we thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.